Y'all, Wizard101 is about to update a bunch of spells. They just put out a bunch of teasers. So Wizard101 did a live stream today where they are basically teasing the upcoming Spellman update in the spring update. So in the previous big Spellman update that they did rank 1 through 6 spells, and this is basically a way for you to customize your spell. If you want, you could just use these Spellman stat damage to your spells, but they also do some really cool and intricate stuff if you go down the other path with your Spellman. They teased a new spell for literally almost every school, so let's jump right into it. Starting in hot with Storm Owl, this is going to be a spell that actually uses heals on yourself to regain pips. Now, the Spellman path for Storm Owl, in my opinion, really interesting. I don't even think the devs really talked about this, but the top path is a serious hitter. Right now, if you were to cast a spell, not only can it only do a maximum of 1470, the low range of this, 1330, is pretty low for a 10 pip spell. But if you were to get all the Spellmans for this, the high end of this does 120 more damage. That's actually a ton considering that Storm's max damage now is over 200 even in PvP. But the Spellman path of this is really cool. This is basically going to be a spell that hits and then gives you pips based on each heal that you have on yourself. So this would be based on a max of 4 heals on yourself, but basically, let's say for some reason you somehow managed to get 4 heals on yourself, this spell would literally hit and give you 12 pips back. That's what this card is saying. Now, I really like the idea of getting pips back as value instead of damage. Right now, we're really used to gambiting stuff for damage, right? This is going to be a new form of value. Big concerns here. How easy is it, 1, to get 2 heals on yourself, much less 4 to get many pips back? It's going to be almost impossible to get 12 pips back with this. And 2, I'm curious how the pips work. Are they going to be 3 new pips? Are they going to be 1 power pip and a new pip? And let's say that you get more than 7 pips from this spell. Are you going to be getting those new pips turned into power pips? And is it based on pip conserve? These are the really big questions, right? It can actually be a really big liability to give yourself a bunch of white pips if they're not going to turn into power pips with a card like this. The next insane spell that they tease, this one's actually kind of ridiculous, is Frost Giant. Now, just like Storm Owl, if you want to get Spellmans for the top path, you're just going to be doing more damage. So you could either do more damage and stun, or you could go the bottom path, and this looks like an insanely powerful blade removal spell. So right now, the best ice blade removal is Wyvern. It can clear up to 3 blades and make up to 3 traps on your opponent. They basically made this into a more powerful 7-pip version, and even though it's an AoE, it does as much damage as a single hit spell would do. So instead of the 3 that, you know, Wyvern affects, this spell is going to affect up to 5 blades, meaning blade stack strategies now have an extremely solid 7-pip counter. I think it's really cool that the rank 1 through 6 spells only really affect like 2 things or 3 things maximum. Now, because there's more pips involved, we're seeing a lot more stuff being affected. It could be really overwhelming for people to adapt to, or it could make for even more variety than we're used to. They also teased Avenging Fossil, which I would argue is one of the most useless 10-pip spells. If you just want to do it for damage, great. But if you're looking at like the main spell, right? Like we're talking the one in your main inventory, this is a garbage ass spell. I don't even think the top path is worth talking about, but if you were to get Spellmans for the bottom path, it seems to be doing something kind of nuts. Very similar to Storm Owl. Basically, this is like a weakness gambit instead of leveraging heals like Storm Owl does, but it gambits weaknesses, meaning it gets rid of them, and for each weakness it gets rid of on your opponent, it gives you 3 pip. I'm gonna be honest, this one doesn't seem to be really doing that much damage, like even for a death spell, like, you know, like it's kind of nuts. But yeah, the fact that you can literally give up to 4 weaknesses and get up to 12 pips from this spell is obviously something that you might consider, right? It could just be literally free damage because you're just gonna get the pips back anyways if you have too many weaknesses on your opponent. It could be cool. I kind of see people just spamming 3-folds into this potentially, which I don't think does enough to solve the issue, which is the fact that 3-fold spamming seems very powerful. Considering Vampire also turns weaknesses into extremely powerful weaknesses that are based on your school, I feel like this is just giving so much more reason to literally do nothing but spam 3-folds, which it's basic as hell, but you could just spam this forever on a death. I love the idea of avenging, but I do think they need to look into spells like Vampire that are doing so much when you already have a weakness, if they're also going to add even more reasons to use weaknesses. Not sure if it makes sense. I just want death to be more than just spamming 3-folds, which is why the spell, kind of the one I'm least excited about so far. Honestly, it seems a little underwhelming damage-wise too. As if the pip craziness wasn't over, they also leaked yet another spell for balance that's also based on pip. Now, this one is absolutely absolutely crazy because the damage is already really high. A 7-pip spell doing nearly 700 damage makes it start competing with shads, which are 2 shadow pips. Kind of nuts how much damage you could do with some of these spells. But the condition for getting pips from this is also really crazy. You basically get a pip for every single shield on your opponent. That's what this card is saying. Now, my big and obvious concern is that if you put on an elemental shield, because Hydra is a ridiculously powerful spell for 6 pips, is someone just gonna now, like, you know, power Nova you and get 3 pips for it? And on some schools, the only way to actually stay ahead of Hydra is to use multiple LE shields ahead of time. Right now, this spell literally can hit through an elemental shield, but because of the way this echo mechanic works, it gives you 3 shields for it. It echoes, basically, it mirrors the shields on your opponent. I've heard that they're doing this in the official Discord. Not sure if it's true, but apparently they're going to move this echo mechanic to after the hit is done. So let's say that you hit into an elemental shield. This would just hit into an elemental shield and do nothing else. Let's say that you were hit into 2 elemental shields that were the same type. You would hit into the elemental shield and then get 3 shields. That's ideally how this would work in the future update. If they did that, I think it could be really interesting. If they don't do that, the spell is just broken with the way Hydra is right now. Brace yourselves. Up to this point, we've actually been pretty, you know, mild with it because I feel like what they've done with this spell is actually kind of nuts. This is Rain of Fire, or at least what it's gonna be in the upcoming update with the spell elements. Now, I'm gonna be honest, the top path is surprisingly ass for something that's 9 pips. It is cool in the sense that it actually hits and then it does an overtime. This is not something that Fire has had in a long time. But it only does 1,000 damage for 9 pips. I think the fact that it's an AoE, it's taking a serious hit for that. And I don't know if y'all don't know, but the 7-pip AoEs actually don't take a hit for their damage for being AoEs. The 9-pip ones, if they do exist, do apparently. I don't know why they do that. I think it's because you get all those 7-pip spells at the end of Arc 1. But the bottom path is a real story here. So the way that this works, right? The base version of the spell is 3 6-round overtimes. So it looks like they're trying to deal with the fact that if you're an overtime school, any spell that's anti-overtime like Kraken can easily counter you. So if you're putting a ton of pips into a gigantic overtime, the answer is simply to Kraken it off, and there's no point ever using it if you're a Fire, for example. And I think they're getting away with, you know, adding overtimes for high pips by adding more rounds so that it's harder to remove everything, right? If a spell like Kraken can only clear 2 overtimes, then something that, you know, is up to 3 damage overtimes or even more is harder for Kraken to just fully counter. That's the idea. The idea is that for 9 pips, you're not losing all the damage that you cast if someone counters it in a more advanced combat mode like PvP. But what about the rest of it? So the way that this works is, after those 3 overtimes are added by the Rain of Fire, you can add up to 3 more overtimes per heal that you have on you. And each of those overtimes do 345. Now this, in my opinion, a little too complicated even for your boy, because at the end of this, you can cast a spell if you have enough heals on yourself that has 6 overtimes on it. I'm gonna be honest, I'm all for the craziness, but if a spell like this can do crazy extra damage for 2 overtimes, I almost feel like a spell that can add 6 overtimes is doing too much. I feel like 4 should be the maximum. And let's not forget about animation time. If one spell can create 6 overtimes on your opponent, I feel like they got to do something about speeding up the animation, because that's going to be nuts. But what about the actual concept of the spell? I honestly think it's really cool. It's a healing type of spell. Fire doesn't really get a lot of ways to use healing. And yet there are spells like Link and even Phoenix that can actually create multiple overtime heals on yourself if you happen to, like, you know, fulfill a certain thing. So we might see a little bit more healing and actually being able to use the healing for extra damage, which is really important if you want to, like, you know, work on that as a Fire, because otherwise Fire has no defense at all. Now, if y'all thought like the King Art spells were going to be free of these spell elements, you were wrong. They actually tease the Myth King Art as well. This one is actually really cool because it uses chromatic effects. And the reason why this is cool is because this definitely means that any school will be able to use Myth King Art. Any school should theoretically be able to use any King Art. So what do I mean by chromatic? So basically what the spell does, it clears up to 5 weaknesses, and then I think because of those weaknesses, it creates up to 5 traps based on the school of the caster. That's what that symbol means. Now, this is really cool. If you're on like a myth, especially, doing a 3-fold twice, meaning creating 6 weaknesses on your opponent, now has an extremely easy way to counter it and really punish it hard. 50 traps, that's not something you want to deal with. 5 of them is like crazy. And added on to being a weakness counter, it also adds not 1, but 2 overtimes on your opponent that are gigantic and detonate in 5 rounds. Now, a spell like Kraken can literally counter all 8 pips of this Myth King Art because it can clear up to to 2 overtimes. So I think this is one of those spells that unless you know your opponent can't Kraken, you can't use it unless you have weaknesses on you. We'll see what the other King Art spells do. This one is extremely good against weaknesses, but otherwise a pretty big liability to have in your deck. Speaking of clearing 5-ass traps, Life just got one of the craziest spells I've ever seen. Can I be honest? I'm a little flabbergasted. This is the new heal that Life is gonna get. Now, I know a lot of people say that Life and heals is boring and annoying, but a 2300 health heal, that's kind of nuts, even considering we have spells like Regenerate for 5 pips. I think the top path is so ass compared to the main path. Basically what it is, it's 2000 total healing, and it also has an anti-trap thing, just like Centaur, except it can clear up to 5 traps on you to make blades that are universal. Now, I haven't really talked about it up to this point, but I wanted to get through all the spells that, you know, follow these rules, you know, before talking about it. These AoEs, right? Like Frost Giant, I assume Rain of Fire, Rebirth. They're gonna be using a new mechanic called selectively, you know, picking. And the idea behind it is that these things could either be single target, double target, triple target, or affecting everybody, depending on how many people you click when you click on the spell. And there'll be a drop off after you are done. So, like, for example, this Rebirth spell, you could pick and choose who on your team you want to remove traps from, and who's gonna get blades from those traps, and give those people healing. They also said on the KI Live that they tease these spells on, that these drop-offs from, you know, picking more targets aren't going to be linear. It's not going to be like it does half of what it does if you pick 2 people, it does a third of what it does with 3 people. There should be a drop-off. We won't know the drop-off until they're done, but a lot of these AoE spells, especially I assume the ones that are 7 and up that are AoEs, those are the rules that they're going to follow. This might actually make it to the other AoEs in the game, you know, that they add other spellments to. So we'll see how that works when it comes to things like PvP, advanced content. This should not affect PvE at all if you are worried about your AoEs. And finally, a very weird teaser, because this is not like an Arc 2 spell whatsoever, but they also teased out Thieving Dragon getting a new spellman path. Now, this is a Beast Moon spell. It is so bad. Like, it does, for 4 pips, less than 200 damage, sometimes less than 150 damage after stealing a shield. Considering that Splash Squatch is a mid spell that for 4 pips, yes, a school pip, but still 4 pips, does way more damage, literally over double while doing the exact same mechanic, it's just literally a useless spell. They're adding a path that hits and then destroys an aura on your opponent for a 70 shield. This would be only the second spell in the game that actually, you know, manipulates auras. So the fact that this is not going to be the only anti-aura spell means that we could see other spells have stuff that manipulate auras and manipulate bubbles. This is going to be a huge ice buff, which I think ice really, really needs in PvP. I'm excited because this could be one of the best spells that ice has gotten in like a way long time. Those are all of the teasers, y'all. You wouldn't believe it. Even after this video, there's a ton of stuff to cover for the upcoming update. I didn't cover everything. There's tons of stuff to talk about. So make sure you turn on noties so you don't miss all the videos. I did want to give y'all the preview of what they've given us. Let me know what you guys think of these spells. You guys think they're doing too much, or do you guys think it's like adding an exciting element? I look forward to reading all of y'all's comments. Drop a like if you enjoyed. Leave us up if you're new. And if somebody hasn't told you you're awesome today, they doing something wrong. Stay awesome. See y'all soon. And yeah.